We are the Daf Samach Aleph Amid base at the top, 61b right at the top. In Machlokes, in the Mishnah we saw, there are various intents that can make invalidated carbon. Somebody intends for it to be a different carbon, not what it was designated as, meaning a shlamim instead of a Pesach. That was the previous Mishnah. Now we're at it. This Mishnah said if you had intent for people that couldn't eat this carbon Pesach, and the main function of a carbon Pesach is to be eaten at the night of the Seder. So if you had intent for it not to be eaten, but for people that can't eat it, such as people that are old, people that were not part of the group of the carbon Pesach, people that were uncircumcised, or people that were tamei, so that would invalidate it. However, if it was a mix, if it was for both people that could eat it and people that couldn't eat it, it would be valid. That was the Mishnah. The question is, if you shechted it for the intent of people that were circumcised, but the intent of the spritzing of the blood was for people that were not circumcised, would that make it kosher, or would that still be kosher or not? Because the shechting permits it to be eaten, but the spritzing of the blood is perhaps not really a part of the eating, and so if somebody couldn't eat the carbon, that the spritzing of the blood for them would not make it invalid. That's the basis of this question. So Rav Chisda, the second line of the daf, Rav Chisda Amar Pasal, Rabba Amar Kosher. Rav Chisda says it's going to be invalid, and Rabba says it's going to be valid. Rav Chisda Amar Pasal Yesh Machshavas Harelim Bezrika. He says that the intent about who's going to eat it is effective at the time of spritzing of the blood, and therefore, if those people were uncircumcised and therefore not allowed to eat the carbon Pesach, so that would invalidate it because the intent is of consequence, even during the spritzing of the blood. And Rabba kosher, Rabba says it's kosher. That the intent of the people eating it is of no consequence during the spritzing of the blood, because that's not that's not what makes it kosher to eat, and therefore the fact that you had intent, the Kohen had intent for people that couldn't eat it during the time of the spritzing is not going to be of consequence and will not invalidate it. Amar Rabba Manamina. So Rabba says, how can I prove this to you? That the thought, the intent for people that couldn't eat it, such as someone who's uncircumcised, at the time of spritzing is of no consequence. The Tani we learn, perhaps someone who's uncircumcised, which the Torah says someone who is uncircumcised cannot eat of the carbon Pesach, perhaps that he would ruin it for the rest of the Chabura, for the rest of the group that's in his designated group for this carbon, for this Pesach. V'dinu. And it's a logical conclusion, a kal v'chomer, or at least a comparison. We have two invalidations in regards to the carbon Pesach. Someone who is tamei cannot eat the carbon Pesach, and someone who has who did not have a bris is not allowed to eat the carbon Pesach. Ma tuma, just as by tuma, the entire group has to be tamei, not able to eat it. If some of them are not going to be able to eat it, that's not going to make the entire group not able to eat it. Af arla, so too by arla, one of the group in not having had a bris, or some of the group not having had a bris, is not going to invalidate the whole group. Now the Gemara later is going to ask us, why are you so sure by tuma more than you are by arla? You asking a question if whether arla, meaning someone who's someone in the group uncircumcised, if it ruins it for the whole group, and yet you're sure that if one member of the group is tamei, that's not going to invalidate it for the whole group. Why is that more certain than this? In any case, or perhaps let's go the other way around. Not other way, but another way. We have another invalidation in regards to all karbanos, and that is if you have the intent to eat the carbon beyond the time that it's supposed to be eaten. That's called a tumah of zman, of time, a psul of time. It's pigul. If somebody intends that when they're going to eat this korban, even though it's only supposed to be eaten the Pesach, for instance, that night, if he intends to eat it the next day, that intent will invalidate the korban, even though they never end up eating it beyond the correct time. In fact, they're not allowed to eat it at all, because that from the start invalidates it, because they had the machshavas pigul, a thought of pigul being the thought, invalidating thought of eating this korban beyond the time that the Torah allotted for it. So this is true for every korban. So we have orla, in this case, being uncircumcised invalidates, and the thought of eating it beyond the time would invalidate it. Mazman asaba mitzvah zman. Just as over there, even if you're only going to eat one kazayas, you say, I'm going to eat all of it tonight, but I'm going to leave one kazayas for tomorrow for the day meal, or any korban that you think I'm going to eat all of it in the correct time, but I'm just going to leave a little over for the next day. That's going to invalidate it, the entire korban. Af arla, asaba mitzvah arla. So therefore, the arla as well should be that one member of the group is uncircumcised, it should invalidate. So we have two comparisons to make. We have a comparison that's specific to korban Pesach, Tumah. If one member of the group is Tameh, it's going to invalidate it. Or Arla, if one member of the group is uncircumcised, it should therefore also not invalidate it, because by Tumah you need everyone Tameh. So to here you would need everyone to be an Arla. Or we can say it this way, compare it to the invalidation of pigul, of the thought of eating it beyond the time. Just like over there, one kazais, one small piece of the korban, the intent of eating it beyond the time would invalidate the entire korban. So to over here, one person in the group, or the intent for one person in the group that's uncircumcised would invalidate it for the whole group. So the Gemara says, okay, nira lami doma. Let's see who's it more comparable to. Let's compare it from rather to Arla to Tuma, because these are two specific things that apply only here in regards to a korban Pesach. In all other matters of a korban, even someone who himself is tamei or himself is uncircumcised is allowed to bring a korban. Actually, not to bring a korban themselves, but to send a korban. If he's tamei, he can't come into the Beis HaMikdash. He won't bring it himself, but they can send the messenger and say, "Here, please bring this on my behalf," and it would be a valid korban. So let's compare these two that are unique to korban Pesach, and say, just as Tumah, you need everybody tamei, and if one person is tamei in the group, that's not going to invalidate it. So to Arel, uncircumcised persons, one in the group is going to be is not going to be enough to invalidate the whole group. Va'al yochiach zman, and don't bring me proof from the invalidation of the wrong thought of time, shenoig b'chol hazvachim, because that is a typical thing, and so that's not comparable to the unique invalidation over here, which is the invalidation for someone who is not going to eat, someone's uncircumcised or someone's tamei. These are unique to korban Pesach. Or perhaps we should go in this direction. Let's compare Arel, the uncircumcised, to which there's no exemptions to this. There are no exemptions whatsoever for someone who is uncircumcised to eat the korban Pesach. Let's compare that to the invalidation of pigul, of the thought of eating this beyond the time, which also there are no exemptions. No, it's always this way, that if the intent was a thought of pigul, eating it beyond the time, it's going to invalidate the korban, and there are no exceptions. And don't bring me proof from the invalidation of Tumah that there are ways that you can actually eat the korban Pesach while tamei. and that is when the majority, it's Tumah Hutra Betzibur, when the majority of Klal Yisrael, or the majority of Kahanim, are Tamei, so then the Korban Pesach would come Betuma. And we'll see more about this, but this idea why there could technically be or should technically be an obligation nowadays to bring a Korban Pesach as well, because the majority or the entirety of Am Yisrael is Tamei. There are other technicalities, no Mizbeach, no access, etc. So Talmud Loimer Zois. So the Brisa says, okay, we're going to prove it from the pasuk itself, from the word Zos. It says Zos Chukas HaPesach. This is the statute of the Pesach, and and Kol Orel Lo Yochabo. Any or all uncircumcised shall not eat of it. So that the Gemara is going to learn from that verse. So the Gemara says, "Maizos." What does it mean? What are you bringing proof from the word zos? This is the statute of Pesach. From the fact that it says zos, this is the statute. It's teaching us that only if everybody in the group is uncircumcised, that's when it's an invalid korban. But if some are circumcised, some are not, it's going to be okay. That would be learned from the latter part of the pasuk, from the second part of the pasuk, where it says v'chol orel lo yochaboy, and all uncircumcised may not eat it. And the Gemara's understanding that we should read the verse to mean if everyone in the group is uncircumcised, then they may not eat it. Elalav hachiktan. So rather, this is the teaching. Talmud lema v'chol orel kula orla pasla miksasali pasla. From the fact that the Torah says all uncircumcised may not eat it, it means if the entire group is uncircumcised, then the intent of the korban for that group is going to invalidate it. But if some of the group are uncircumcised, but some are circumcised, then the intent for that group would still be valid, and the korban's valid. And now the Gemara is going to say, well, that's for the shechita, that's for the moment that you shech the korban, which is what allows it to be eaten. But for the spritzing of the blood, perhaps there it doesn't have this rule of everybody, only if everybody's circumcised. The kula arlami is pasla. Perhaps you think over there, even if perhaps over there, if everybody, just like by the shechita, so to here, if everybody is uncircumcised, it should invalidate it. Talmud lema zois. That's why it says this is the statute and this is a limit. It's limiting, and which tells us only in this case, only in the shechita, that if everybody in the group is uncircumcised and you shech the korban for that group, that's going to invalidate it. However, and however, if when you spritz the blood, you intend only for the uncircumcised in the group, it still would not invalidate. Even if the only people that you intended for were the uncircumcised. And if you can tell me why is it that you're taking it that the spritzing of the blood is more lenient than the shechting of the blood? Because as we said, because there's no intent about those that are eating it by the spritzing of the blood, because the spritzing of the blood is not what makes it permissible to be eaten. It's the shechting of the korban that makes it permissible to be eaten, and so therefore that's only going to apply during the shechita, during the shechting. You have to think about some people at least that can eat it, but by the spritzing of the blood, even if your intent is only for the people that cannot eat it, nevertheless it's going to be okay, because the eaters, as it were, right? The eaters are not a matter of intent during the spritzing of the blood. So that's Rabba's interpretation of this brisa as a proof to himself. Rav Chisda responds, "Adar Rabba, I can take this brisa completely the opposite and prove it my way. Adar Rabba leidach gisa. Tamalem v'chol orel kula orel pasla miksasale pasla. The Torah says v'chol orel." All are uncircumcised, to tell you that if all in the group are uncircumcised and you shecht it for them, it's going to be invalid. Aval zrika, but for shechting, even if you intend for some of the group that are uncircumcised and also for those that are circumcised, it's going to be invalid. Why? Maybe by zrika also, by the spritzing of the blood, also you require everybody to be uncircumcised. But if some are circumcised and some are not, and you intend for both, it's not going to invalidate it. Therefore, the Torah says zois, which limits this leniency, that it's only going to be invalid if you exclusively thought about the uncircumcised in the group. Shchita, the miktsas lepasla. The shchita, by shechting the animal, that's what we're going to say, oh, you slaughter this animal with the intent for both a group of people that are circumcised and uncircumcised, that's going to be valid. Aval zrika, but by spritzing of the blood, even if only some of the group are uncircumcised, it's going to be invalid. Why? And if you can ask me, why is the spritzing of the blood more strict than the slaughtering of the animal itself, when the slaughtering of the animal is what makes it permissible to be eaten? So for this, there's a unique halacha in regards to the invalidation we talked about earlier. The most severe invalidation of a carbon is this concept of pigul. And pigul is the what we talked about earlier, when somebody at one of the four services of a carbon intended to eat at least one olive size or more of the carbon beyond the time that's supposed to eat it, as we saw before. So if somebody shechts a carbon Pesach or any carbon, and they intend during, let's say, the shechting, the slaughtering of the animal, that they're going to eat one part of the animal, at least an olive size, beyond the allotted time, beyond the time that the Torah allows for this carbon. So that invalidates it. However, there's a caveat. It's only going to count as pigul, this severe invalidation, if all the other aspects of the carbon were done correctly. So they shechted the animal, the Kohen shechted the animal with the intent of eating some of it beyond the time, and then received the blood and brought the blood to the Mizbeach and spritzed the blood with all the correct intent or neutral intent. But they didn't have another invalidating intent. But if at any other point they thought, I'm also going to eat some of it outside of the of Yerushalayim, where the boundaries that you're only allowed to eat it within, that would invalidate the initial invalidation. It's the carbon's invalid because they had invalid thoughts, but it would not count as pigul. Pigul only becomes invalid as pigul if the rest of the parts of the service were done without any other invalidating thoughts, meaning, essentially, that it only becomes pigul at the moment the blood is spritzed with the correct intent. So Rav Chisda says, so we see that the zerika, the spritzing of the blood in the Mizbeach, is actually an important part, so important that it can solidify the invalidation of pigul. That's what's going to make it happen as a proper invalidation. So we had two ways of taking this brisa. One, that Rabbah took to say, oh, the Torah said, Zos chukas Torah, this is the statute of Torah of Pesach, which limits it, right? It says Zos is limiting. And they both took it to mean that when the Torah says, V'chol orel lo yochava, and all orel, uncircumcised, may not eat of it, means that the entire group is uncircumcised. And therefore, the limit to that is going to be by the shechting. It's only invalid if everyone in the group is uncircumcised. Whereas by spritzing of the blood, it's not so. Rabbah took it to the more lenient, saying, whereas by spritzing, even if everybody is uncircumcised, it's not going to be invalid. And Rav Chisda took it to the strict side. Not only if everybody's uncircumcised will it be invalid, but even if some are uncircumcised, it'll be invalid. The Gemara now is going to challenge and say, who told you to read the pasuk that way? Who told you to read V'chol orei lo yochel bo, that which means all uncircumcised shall not eat it, that the entire group's uncircumcised? Maybe it should be read as all uncircumcised shall not eat of it, meaning even if one of the group, if any of the groups uncircumcised, they may not eat it. And then the limit of Zos is going to mean something else. Maskef lo Ravashi. So Ravashi challenged. Who tells you that when it says and all uncircumcised may not eat of it, it means that the entire group's uncircumcised? Maybe what it means is Dilma hayvachal ora mashma koldu orla. Maybe what it means is no uncircumcised may eat of it, all uncircumcised may not eat of it, meaning even if one of your group is uncircumcised, they may not eat of it, and therefore that would invalidate the whole group. And therefore Zeis is limiting to tell you that it has to be, no, it's not as strict, and only if everyone's uncircumcised, it invalidates the group. And it would be true both for the shechting and for the spritzing. So this cannot be the meaning of the machlokas of Rabbi and Rav Chisda. This cannot be the basis for their machlokas. Elam Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi has a different interpretation. Rav Chisda v'Rabba b'hai krokam mipalgi. So Rav Chisda and Rabba are disagreeing about this verse, and now we go to Samach Beis Amud Aleph at the top, the new interpretation of Rabba and Rav Chisda, 62a at the top. And the meaning over here is going to change that to can you, if the intent was for people that were not menuyim, that were not designated to this group. We talked about this yesterday, that the structure of the Korban Pesach is that everybody has to join a group. And when they join a group, that's the group that they have to eat the Korban Pesach with. And that's their designated group, menuyim. They are counted upon that group. And if the shechting was for some people that were not in the group, it says, v'nirtza lo lechaper alav. The Torah says, the spritzing of the blood will atone for him. Olav v'leh chaver. It'll atone for him, but not for another person that's not in the group. So Rabba Sava Chaveru Dumididei. Rabba says that the other person is similar to himself. That meaning you intended for the wrong person. That person has to be similar Mahud Bar Kapara, just as he himself is worthy of atonement, meaning that this korban can be valid for him. So the person that the Kohen mistakenly thought of as the owner of or in the group also has to be someone that is worthy of having atonement for him. But if the person that he thought of was someone who is uncircumcised, who anyhow cannot be a part of the group, not eat the Korban Pesach, the Lav Bar Kaparu, who can't be a part of the Korban Pesach, it will not invalidate. So Rabbah says, the Kohen brings this Korban Pesach, and he says, oh, this is, Tzvi Fischer's Korban Pesach. He's got 5 people in the group and includes someone that's uncircumcised, who is not really a part of the group. That would not invalidate it, because even though that his intent was for someone that is not a part of the group, and that could invalidate it because he intended for someone that's not the owner. Nevertheless, since that person is not really a part of Korban Pesach to begin with, because that person is uncircumcised, it would not invalidate. Well, Rav Chisda says that's not true, because the Orel, the uncircumcised person, is obligated in the Korban Pesach. He's simply unable to do it because of his circumstance. So he is a bar kapara. He is someone who is atonable, all right, able to get atonement from this korban. Why? Since even though that he's not able to right now, but he could have himself circumcised, and so he can do a fix, and then he'll be able to eat of the Korban Pesach. So therefore, right now he's considered a part of the korban, and this is the concept that we saw earlier as well in regards to cooking on Yantiv, that there is a concept of hayil, that even though that right now you don't have a certain obligation or a certain exemption or a certain situation, but that situation could come or could be made to come, and therefore you are in that obligation already, even if you haven't changed the circumstance yet. So the Gemara challenges him. Does Rav Chisda follow this idea of hayil, of saying that if since you could make it happen, therefore it's already an obligation by itma? But we learned in regards to cooking on Yontif, he doesn't say that. You're not allowed to bake on Yontif for after Yontif. That we saw, because the Torah only allows you to cook and bake on Yontif that which is ochel nefesh, that which a person will need to be eaten. That alone may be made, and only that which is going to be eaten on Yontif for someone who keeps Yontif. It's a pretty limited permission that the Torah gives. So you're not allowed to cook from Yontif to weekday. And Rav Chisda says, therefore, Amar Loika, that he transgresses the Torah prohibition and gets lashes on account of that prohibition and transgression. You see that it's a Torah prohibition to cook from Yontif into the weekday. And Rabba Amma Eina Loika, Rabba says, no, it's not a transgression. Why? Rabba Amma Eina Loika, Rinan Hayil, and Mikli Orchim Chazile. Since if guests were to show up, they could eat this. So anytime you cook or bake on Yontif, nobody knows that nobody can tell you that this is cooking for the weekday. He's cooking for Yontif, baking for Yontif itself. Wait, but you already ate and you're not hungry anymore. Yeah, but guests can show up. So therefore, I'm allowed to bake in case the guests show up. And therefore, there's no lashes. And Rav Chisda says there's no hail. So why is it over here that he says, well, if he were to circumcise himself, he's allowed to eat of the carbon, and therefore he's part of the carbon, and therefore the intent is going to be invalid and invalidating. It's going to invalidate the carbon because you intended for someone who, if they wanted, can circumcise themselves and be a part of the carbon, and so they are a part of the carbon. So Bishlam the Rabbah ad Rabbah Lakash. Now, it's not really a contradiction in Rabbah. Why over there he says Hayil and over here he doesn't? Hacha mechusa ma'aseh. Because over here, it's true, if he wanted, he can circumcise himself, but he isn't circumcised, and that would take a pretty big act in order to circumcise himself, and therefore that doesn't count as ready for a carbon, as able to do a carbon. You can't say since he could make it change the situation. That's a big since, and it does not apply. Whereas hasam talemechus ma'isa, there. What do I need? That guests show up? I don't have to do anything. If guests show up, they show up, and so I'm cooking and baking in case they show up, and I'm not, and that's not lacking any action, nothing has to change per se. Aval elader of Chisda, and therefore that's why Rabbah over here says that it doesn't count as if the situation is already changed, and by cooking and baking, he says that it's as if the situation has changed. But Rav Chisda, who says over there that we're not going to look at whether the guests are coming or not, and you're not allowed to cook or bake. Yet over here he says, since if he wanted to, he can circumcise himself. That's a pretty strict, a pretty big change. Sakasha, Amri say, they say Kiles Rav Chisda Hayil. They say the reason is because Rav Chisda only says Hayil to be strict. He doesn't say it to be lenient. You can't say, well, since this and this may happen, therefore I'm allowed to do this. No, you can't be lenient on in case some situation changes. But you can be strict in case a situation changes. And so over here, in case the person were to circumcise himself, he would be able to eat at the Pesach. Therefore, your invalidating thought of thinking that I'm shechting this or I'm making this carbon on behalf of this uncircumcised person, and he's not really the owner, that would count as an invalidating thought because he is able to somehow make himself a part of the carbon. The chumrah isle. So for a strict situation, he does have this idea of hayil, of making yourself change the situation to make it a relevant factor in the halacha. John, what's the question again?
I'm wondering if there are other types of invalidation that are tied to a specific aspect or a specific, action or intent or something. I didn't realize that like pigul was it's only going to be in the category of pigul if the only thing that's wrong is the person's intent. if it's, if it was a bad carbon, if it was a wrong time, all these other things. So I'm just wondering if there are other categories that are like that.
No, that's unique to Pigel, meaning Pigel is a thought of eating the carbon beyond its time. And that's a very unique invalidation. And like you pointed out, that's a unique thing, that it needs all the rest to be done correctly. All other invalidations would become invalid if any part becomes invalid, and that's true for it. So, for instance, one of the invalidations is taking the part of the carbon, or any part of the carbon, or the carbon out of the Azara, out of the confines of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. So that whatever went out, even though the rest of it was done correctly or incorrectly, it's not going to change that. But that will change the pigel, because part of it was now invalid. So that would make the pigel not pigel. So it's a unique type of invalidation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Amar le Mar Zutra bereder Rav Mori leRavina. Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Mori, said to Ravina, Ktani hoil v'orla peseles v'tuma peseles. So in the original brisa, we had said, let's make a comparison. How should we figure this out? Orla is an invalidation by the carbon Pesach, and Tuma, being impure, is an invalidation by carbon Pesach. So we have two invalidations unique to carbon Pesach, if one of the members of the group is uncircumcised, or if one of the members of the group are tamei. Well, not one of the members. If someone is uncircumcised or someone is tamei, they may not partake in the carbon Pesach, and that's an invalidation. Now, our question was, if part of the group is tamei, does that invalidate that? We said no. And the question was, if part of the group was uncircumcised, does that invalidate? So Arla peselas v'tuma peselas. Arla invalidates and Tuma invalidates. Ma Tuma le'asaba mixas Tuma kachal Tuma. Just by Tuma impurity, we say that only if the entire group's tamei, it's invalid. But if some of the group is invalid, it's not going to invalidate it. And if some of the group's tamei, it's not going to invalidate it. So therefore, we're going to compare and say, so too in regards to the uncircumcised, it's only if the entire group's uncircumcised. But if some are circumcised and some are not, it's not going to be invalid. It's a haytoma hechidam. Now, in what case are we talking about that tuma itself, that some of the group are tamei and some are not, is not invalid? What is this? What kind of tuma? What kind of invalidation are we talking about? Are we talking about the people in the group are invalid, are tamei, and therefore invalid? What do you mean? That some of the group are tamei and therefore invalid, and some are not? The if you have 5-6 people, 4 or 5 people that are tamei, and 4 or 5 people that are not tamei, that are tahor, that are pure, that's not going to invalidate the carbon. Tamei and tahor, that's not going to invalidate it for the people that are tahor, that are allowed to eat of the carbon. So gabe arla nami halei pasli. Well, that should also be true in regards to people that are uncircumcised. The Tanan, as we learned, lamulin and la reilin kasha, that if you intended the korban for a group, some are circumcised and some are not, it's going to be kosher. That's in our Mishnah. So therefore, why are you so sure in regards to tuma? Oh, well, by tuma, the invalidation is not going to take effect regardless by shechting or by spritzing of the blood, because, as it says in our Mishnah, only if everybody is tamei, not if some of the group are impure and some are pure, some are tamei, some are not. Well, the same applies by Arla in our Mishnah. So why are you more certain about the tamei, impurity, that it's only going to be invalid if the entire group's invalid, entire group's tamei, and by Arla, you're not sure if it's going to invalidate it if if some of the group are Ella, so therefore it cannot be talking about in the brisa before. It cannot be talking about in a case where some of the group or all the people in the group are themselves tummy, but rather it's talking about the carbon, the animal itself being tummy or not. Ela betumas basar. So rather, it's talking about with the meat, the carbon itself is tummy. So what does it mean that by tuma, partial tuma does not affect all the rest of it? The ilu itma chad me'evarim. What it means is if one limb of the carbon, so you have a lamb, this is your lamb for the Pesach, it was shechted, it was all done properly, and one leg became tummy. So then it does not invalidate the rest of the carbon. The part that became tamei, we burn it. But the rest of the carbon is allowed to be eaten. So b'mayakim to betumas basa. Okay, so you now define the first phrases in the brisa talking about tuma impurity. It's talking about the meat, the carbon meat itself becoming impure. Okay, let's check ema seifa. Let's look the end of the end of the brisa. In trying to figure out which way to go here, we said we can compare it to something that's tameh and unique to Carbon Pesach, or we can compare it to the invalid thought of beyond the time. And in the brisa it said those two comparisons, and now it says so let's compare it to something that applies everywhere and not to something that applies only by Carbon Pesach. Now, umay tuma, and we compare it and we say, well, tuma only applies to Carbon Pesach. If we say the meat of the carbon becoming tameh, that does apply to all other karbanos as well. That's not unique to Carbon Pesach. We said earlier that only Carbon Pesach has an invalidation of bringing the carbon while tuma. All other offerings, all other karbanos, even though you yourself can't bring it into the mizbeach if you're tameh, but you can send it with someone else. So Carbon Pesach is unique that if the owner is tameh, he cannot bring it. But we're not talking about the owner being tameh. You just defined the brisa to be talking about that the meat became tameh and said that they cannot be talking about the owner or the group being tameh. Elapshita, but Thomas Gavri, so it must be that we're talking about the person himself. What does it mean that it's not applicable to other karbanos? The ilu kalazvachim are the tameh meshach karbanos, because all other offerings, all other karbanos, even someone who's uncircumcised or tameh can send a messenger to bring his carbon. But in regards to Carbon Pesach, someone who's uncircumcised or someone who is invalid himself, is tameh, may not send a messenger to bring their carbon for them. So Reisha betumas basar v'sefer betumas gavri. So the beginning of the brisa is talking about when it mentions the term tameh, ritually impure. It's talking about the meat of the animal, the carbon being impure, and the second part where we're trying to figure out how to compare it, we're comparing it to the person himself, the owner or one of the group being impure. That's the two different subjects. We're just looking shame tuma kapara. We're just looking at the concept of tuma. As long as there's some sort of comparison, that's sufficient, even though that it's talking about two different aspects of tuma. Or perhaps we can say no, it's actually talking about the same aspect. Seifa nami betumas basar, that even there's a distinction and a uniqueness in the tuma in regards to Carbon Pesach that's also unique, even about the carbon itself being tameh. And what does it mean that it doesn't apply to all other karbanos, even though, of course, all other karbanos itself, every other carbon as well, if the meat becomes tameh, ritually impure, spiritually impure, it's going to be invalid. But there's a distinction. The ilu b'chalas v'achem mention it b'chelav b'basa kaim, mention it b'basa v'chelav kaim zerek adam. In all other karbanos, as long as one part of the carbon is still not impure, is still valid, is still tahor, then you're allowed to spritz the blood. That means if somebody brings, let's say, a Thanksgiving offering. So they bring an offering, they had come through an illness, they bring a toda, and parts of the carbon became invalid. It became tameh, became ritually impure. As long as one aspect of it, whether it's even a piece of fat that's not kosher to be eaten, that goes on the mizbeach, the chalev, it's still tahor, it's still pure, then you can spritz the blood. However, the Korban Pesach is unique in that if only part that's left is the part that is not, you're not allowed to eat, such as the forbidden fats that go on the mizbeach, and you're not allowed to eat it, that part is the part that is not that is still ritually pure, that's tar. The rest of it had become tummy. It's invalid because, as we said, the Korban Pesach is primarily for the eating purposes, so that the owner can eat it at the seder. And therefore, if all parts that are edible became tummy, you're not allowed to spritz the blood. It's an invalid korban. So that's a uniqueness that pertains only to Korban Pesach. Pesach nit mechelev ubasa kayim zerkas adam nit basa v'chelev kayim eino zerkas adam. So therefore, it's unique. This is it for today. And Matzah Shabbos, we're going to continue with this analysis of this brisa that talks about if some of it became ritually impure and some is not, and we're going to try and talk about the and analyze what the meaning of the brisa is when it says some of it is tamei impure. Yashakach.